They say Victor Castellano has no weakness, but on that morning his past came back in a way no one expected, and what he did next left the underworld speechless. 7:42 in the morning, and Victor Castellano sat in the back of his armored Maybach, his cold, gray eyes staring at the clock on the dashboard as he let out a long breath. Because the traffic in front of Westbrook Academy was slower than a turtle crossing hot pavement with luxury sedans, black SUVs, and expensive European cars forming a line that seemed endless. His convoy of 3 vehicles crawled forward inch by inch, while his bodyguard Marco watched the surroundings from the front seat. "Dad, did you know I have a math test today?" And Victor turned his head to look at his 8-year-old son Ethan, who was sitting beside him reading a book, and he asked if he studied, and Ethan barely looked up from his pages, saying, "Sort of," and, when pressed, he admitted he studied last night about 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and Ethan shrugged, saying, "Dad, it is math, and numbers are numbers because they do not change." Victor shook his head, but could not hide a small smile that rarely appeared on his face because Ethan had this annoying ability to turn any argument into something that seemed to make sense, even when it made no sense at all. And for the moment he looked just like his mother Maria, who had been gone for 5 years. The car in front moved forward a few yards, and the driver pulled the Maybach a little further and stopped at the crosswalk, which was full of mothers and fathers crossing. And that is when Victor saw something that made his heart stop for the first time in 5 years. Between a blonde mother talking on her cell phone and a father balancing 3 backpacks on his shoulders, a woman was crossing the street pushing a double stroller, and Victor frowned because there was something painfully familiar about that woman. The way she walked, slightly leaning forward, the chestnut brown hair, the way she bit her lower lip when she was focused, the same way she did when she was 15 years old. And he thought, no, it could not be. Victor Castellano, the man who had ordered deaths without blinking, the man who controlled the entire East Coast underworld, felt his heart jump inside his chest, that uncomfortable jump that happens when you are at the top of a roller coaster and realize there is no turning back. But this woman was not the Amelia he remembered, not the bright-eyed girl who had disappeared without a word 19 years ago. This woman was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes, wearing a faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers, pushing a stroller with one crooked wheel. The woman lifted her head for a moment, dodging a puddle on the pavement, and Victor saw her face, those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for over a decade. Amelia Ward. If you enjoy this story, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. Now let us find out what the most dangerous man in the city did when fate brought his first love back into his life. For one brief moment, Victor was no longer the 36-year-old boss sitting inside an armored Maybach, but was instead 17 again, standing beneath the oak tree behind Westbrook High School, watching a 15-year-old brown-haired girl laugh as if the world held nothing to fear. Amelia Ward, back then, had clear green eyes like a spring lake, and her smile was enough to make Victor forget that his father was Tony Castellano, the most feared man on the East Coast of the United States. They loved each other with the pure and fierce love of youth, the kind of love Victor believed would last forever, until one September afternoon when Amelia vanished without a goodbye, without an explanation, without a trace. Victor searched for her for months, asked everyone who had ever known her, turned over every place he could think of. But Amelia Ward seemed to dissolve into thin air and took his heart with her. 19 years had passed, and Victor thought the wound had healed, thought he had buried that memory along with the naive boy he once was. But now, seeing Amelia crossing the street with a body worn thin and drained of strength, every old emotion came rushing back like a tidal wave. "Dad, are you okay?" And Ethan's voice pulled Victor back into the present, making him blink several times as if waking from a dream. He looked at his son, then back to the crosswalk where Amelia was struggling with a stroller whose wheel was stuck in a drainage groove along the curb, and the 2 baby girls inside had begun to scream. Amelia tried to pull the stroller free, but the wheel did not move. She tried again and failed, and Victor could see her shoulders trembling, could see the desperation in every movement as people passed by without stopping to help. "Stop the car," Victor said the words before he had time to think, causing Marco to snap around and stare at him as if he had said something insane. "Sir, we are at a crosswalk and security protocol does not allow stopping in a public area like this," Marco said anxiously, but Victor had already opened the door and stepped out before his bodyguard could object further. "Mr. Castellano, please get back in the car," Marco nearly shouted as he hurried after him, but Victor did not listen. He crossed the lane of cars waiting at the red light, ignored the blaring horns and curious stares, ignored every security rule he had followed without fail for 20 years in the business. Marco stood beside the Maybach, one hand resting on the concealed gun beneath his suit jacket, eyes scanning the surroundings for threats, while trying to understand why his boss, the coldest and most calculating man he had ever known, was suddenly acting like a madman over a woman pushing a stroller. Ethan lowered his book and looked through the car window, and for the first time, the boy saw his father walk with something unfamiliar. Not the stride of power and menace he knew so well, but the walk of a man being dragged back by his past. And when Victor stopped a few steps away from Amelia, when he saw more clearly the dark circles beneath her eyes and the pallor of her skin, when he noticed the frayed cuffs of the hoodie she was wearing, the heart of the most ruthless Mafia boss on the East Coast felt as if someone had closed a fist around it and squeezed. "Do you need help?" And Victor heard his own voice rise, low and steady, far calmer than the turmoil churning inside his chest. Amelia looked up, and in the instant her green eyes met his gray ones. Time seemed to freeze for the second time that morning. She stood motionless, lips parted as if she wanted to speak but could not form a single word. And Victor saw a flush slowly spread across her pale cheeks as she realized who the man in front of her was. "Victor." She whispered his name as if it were a curse or a prayer, and he did not know which one she meant. "Hello, Amelia," he replied in a voice he hoped did not betray the fact that his heart was pounding wildly, like that of a teenage boy, rather than a 36-year-old Mafia boss. "What are you doing here? And why are you? And how did you?" Amelia spoke in broken fragments, clearly trying to process the situation, while her mind refused to cooperate. "Your wheel is stuck, and I thought you might need help," Victor said, and without waiting for her consent, he knelt beside the stroller, hands that were used to holding guns and signing death sentences now carefully inspecting the jammed wheel. A fairly large stone was lodged in the axle, and Victor pried it loose with his fingers, his hands smeared with mud that he did not care about even though the suit he was wearing cost as much as 3 months of rent for a middle-class family. "There," he said, standing up and brushing his hands against his trousers out of habit, completely ruining the expensive cashmere fabric without noticing, because his eyes never left Amelia. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, lowering her head to avoid his gaze as if looking into his eyes was too painful. One of the baby girls in the stroller let out a small giggle, and Victor looked down, truly noticing the children for the first time. They were identical, with curly brown hair and wide eyes staring up at him with the pure curiosity only children possess. "Twins?" Victor asked, not understanding why his voice caught in his throat. "Yes, this is Emma, and this is Mia," Amelia said, and as she spoke her daughters' names, her voice softened, warmer and gentler, as if these 2 children were all she had left in the world. "They are beautiful," Victor said honestly, because the girls were indeed lovely, even though their clothes were worn and the stroller was clearly well used. "Thank you," Amelia said again, and an awkward silence settled over them, the heavy silence of 19 years apart, of questions never answered, of wounds never healed. "Let me take you home," Victor offered. "I can drive you and the girls wherever you need to go." "No," Amelia said so quickly it nearly cut him off. "We are fine, and thank you for fixing the wheel, but we can take care of ourselves." "Amelia," Victor began to say more, but she was already pushing the stroller forward, walking quickly as if fleeing from him, from the past, from everything they had once shared. Victor stood there watching her thin figure disappear into the crowd, realizing that even after 19 years, even after becoming a completely different man, Amelia Ward still had the power to make him feel as helpless as he had the day she left without a goodbye. From the school gate, Mrs. Patterson, the secretary who had worked at Westbrook for more than 20 years, observed the entire scene with a cup of coffee in her hand and open curiosity in her eyes, because she had never seen Victor Castellano standing in the middle of the street like a fool for anyone. Victor returned to the Maybach with steps heavier than when he had left it, and when he settled into the back seat, Marco was already waiting, his eyes filled with questions but wise enough not to ask them right away. "Take Ethan to school," Victor ordered in a low voice. And the motorcade moved on while he stared out the window, trying to find Amelia's figure in the crowd, but she had vanished as if she had never been there at all. Ethan stepped out of the car at the school gate, and before leaving, the boy turned back to look at his father with an expression Victor could not read and asked, "Dad, who was that woman?" Victor remained silent for a long moment before answering, "Someone Dad knew a very long time ago," and Ethan nodded, as if that explanation was enough to satisfy his curiosity, then walked through the gate without looking back. When the Maybach left the school area and headed toward the Castellano estate, Victor slid open the partition between the back and front seats and said, "Marco, I need you to investigate someone." Marco turned around, his face serious with the loyalty of a bodyguard who had followed Victor for 15 years, and asked, "Who is it, sir?" "Amelia Ward," Victor said her name, feeling it weigh heavily on his tongue, as if it carried all 19 years of pain with it. "I want to know everything about her, where she lives, what she does for a living, whether she is married, who she has children with, why she appeared here, everything." Marco nodded and did not ask further questions because he knew when silence was required, though Victor could see the curiosity in his guard's eyes, since in 15 years of working together, Marco had never seen Victor show interest in any woman since Maria died. The car glided through the streets, and Victor closed his eyes, letting memory pull him back to the darkest days of his life, the days after Amelia disappeared. He remembered how desperately he had searched for her, how he had called her number hundreds of times only to hear that the subscriber could not be reached, how he had gone to the small apartment where she lived with her aunt only to discover they had moved away without leaving an address. He remembered begging his father to have people look for her, only for Tony Castellano to coldly say that an orphan girl without family or status was not worth his son's attention, and that Victor should forget her and focus on inheriting the family empire. Victor had not forgotten. He never had. But he learned to bury that pain deep inside and build a wall of stone around his heart. Then Maria appeared, the gentlewoman his family arranged for him. And Victor tried to love her, tried to be a good husband, tried to build a new life. But deep down, he knew that part of his heart still belonged to the green-eyed girl who left without a goodbye. And now she had returned, no longer the radiant girl from years ago, but a thin woman with weary eyes and 2 small children in a worn stroller. Victor opened his eyes and looked out the car window as the city slid past like a blurred painting, and he wondered what had happened to Amelia over the past 19 years, what had turned the vibrant girl she once was into the exhausted woman he had just met, and most of all, why she had left without saying a single word. At the same time, on the other side of the city, Amelia Ward pushed the stroller into a cramped studio apartment on the 5th floor of an aging building in the Southern District, where the elevator had been broken for 3 months and the landlord had not bothered to fix it. She had carried each child up 5 flights of stairs first, then gone back for the stroller, her legs trembling with exhaustion, and her arms aching from lifting 2 14-month-old children who were growing heavier by the day. The apartment was barely about 20 square meters, with a single bed that Amelia shared with her daughters, a tiny kitchen corner with an old refrigerator that hummed day and night, and a bathroom with a faucet that leaked nonstop. Mold crept along the wall near the window, paint peeled away in large patches, and the heating system had stopped working since the start of winter, leaving the room perpetually cold despite every effort Amelia made to keep her children warm. She placed Emma and Mia into an old crib bought from a thrift store for $20, then sat down on the only plastic chair in the room, opened her cloth wallet, and began counting what little money remained. $17.63. That was all she had left after paying daycare for the week and buying a small amount of food the night before. Amelia calculated silently. A can of infant formula cost $12 and she needed at least 2 cans a week for both girls, which meant this money would only last 3 more days, and after that she did not know what she would do. Her phone vibrated, and Amelia saw a message from the landlord, as brief and cold as always. "Ms. Ward, you owe 3 months of rent totaling $1,800, and if payment is not made within 7 days, I will be forced to ask you to leave." Amelia set the phone down and closed her eyes, struggling to hold back the panic rising in her chest. She worked 3 jobs every day, mornings serving at a cafe near Westbrook School from 6 in the morning until noon, afternoons cleaning offices for an insurance company from 2 until 6, and evenings delivering food for a restaurant from 8 until 11, all just to afford daycare and food for her children. Yet it was still not enough to pay rent on time. Derek had not paid a single dollar in child support, despite the court order holding him responsible. But Amelia did not dare pursue it, because she knew if she did, he would find a way to retaliate, and she would rather starve than allow her children to face that man again. Emma cried for food, and Amelia stood up to prepare a bottle, her hands trembling from hunger because she had not eaten since the night before, saving every bit of money to buy formula for the girls. She held Emma and fed her, glanced at Mia sleeping peacefully in the crib, and tears began streaming down her face without her bothering to wipe them away. She thought of Victor, of the way he had looked at her that morning, of the expensive suit he dirtied without caring, of the 3-car motorcade and the bodyguards following him, of the luxurious life he now lived, while she struggled every single day just to keep her children alive. 19 years ago, she had left to protect him, so he would not have to choose between her and his family, so he could live the life he had been born into. And now, looking back, she no longer knew whether that decision had been right or wrong. She only knew that she was exhausted, tired down to her bones, with no strength left to fight. Yet she had to keep going because Emma and Mia needed her, because her daughters were everything she had, and she would never give up. Amelia held Emma close, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Mom is sorry. My loves. Mom promises she will try harder. Mom promises things will get better." And then she broke down, sobbing in the cold room while outside. The city remained loud and indifferent, just as it always was. 3 days after the unexpected encounter at the crosswalk, Marco walked into Victor's office at the Castellano estate, carrying a black leather briefcase stuffed with documents, his expression more serious than usual. Victor sat behind the massive oak desk, the warm glow of an antique desk lamp casting light across his angular face. And when he saw Marco enter, he gestured for his bodyguard to take the chair opposite him. "I have the full report on Amelia Ward, sir," Marco said as he opened the briefcase and placed a thick stack of papers on the desk. "And I need to warn you in advance that what I found is not easy to hear." Victor said nothing, only nodded for Marco to continue, his hands tightening around the armrests as if bracing himself for what was coming. "Amelia Ward married Derek Morrison 4 years ago," Marco began. "Derek Morrison is the owner of what appears to be a legitimate real estate company but is actually a front for money laundering, and you will want to know who he launders money for." "For whom?" Victor asked in a low voice, his gray eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. "The Rivera gang, sir," Marco replied, and he saw Victor's jaw clench, because the Rivera gang was the Castellano family's sworn enemy, the same people responsible for the assassination that killed Maria 5 years ago. Victor remained silent for a long moment to absorb that information, then asked, "What was their marriage like?" Marco flipped through several pages, his voice dropping as he spoke. "It was bad, sir. I found police records showing 7 domestic violence calls made by Amelia over 3 years, but she withdrew every complaint afterward, likely due to threats or fear that left her unable to pursue the cases." 7 times, Victor repeated, his voice sounding strangled as his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Yes, sir," Marco continued. "I also found medical records indicating Amelia was hospitalized 3 times for broken ribs, 1 time for a mild head injury, and countless times for bruises and bodily injuries, all listed as household accidents, though doctors noted suspected domestic abuse." Victor stood up and turned his back to Marco, staring out the large window overlooking the estate's expansive garden, struggling to contain the fury boiling inside him. "When did she divorce him?" he asked without turning around. 6 months ago, sir," Marco replied. "She was granted custody of the twin girls but refused child support, likely to sever all ties with Derek completely. And since then, she has been living in a rundown apartment in the Southern District, working 3 part-time jobs to support her children, and is currently 3 months behind on rent." Victor turned back, and his eyes were no longer cold but burning with a fire Marco had never seen in the 15 years he had served him. "Is there anything else?" Victor asked. "Yes, sir," Marco said, his voice tense. "Derek Morrison is hiring attorneys to regain custody, claiming Amelia lacks the financial means to care for the girls, and the court hearing is expected to take place within 1 month." Victor was silent for a long moment, then spoke in a low voice heavy with threat, like thunder before a storm. "I want you to dig deeper into Derek Morrison. Every dirty thing he is hiding, every money laundering transaction, every connection to the Rivera gang. I want it all." Marco nodded and stood up, but before leaving, he turned back and asked, "Sir, may I ask why Amelia Ward matters so much to you?" Victor looked at his loyal bodyguard, and for the first time in many years, Marco saw something deeply human in those cold eyes. As Victor answered, "Because she is the only woman I have ever truly loved, Marco, and someone made her endure hell for 4 years while I knew nothing." The following day, Victor decided to go himself to the cafe Marco had mentioned in the report, a small place located 2 blocks from Westbrook Academy, where Amelia worked the morning shift from 6 until noon. He entered the cafe alone, without Marco or any bodyguards, because he did not want to draw unnecessary attention, even though the decision drove his security team mad. The cafe was small and cozy, filled with the gentle scent of freshly roasted coffee and early sunlight streaming through the large windows, and Victor chose a corner table where he could observe the entire room without being noticed. When he sat down, He saw Amelia standing behind the counter in a brown apron, her hair neatly tied up, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She did not see him because the cafe was busy at that hour, and Amelia was occupied preparing drinks with quick, practiced hands. Though Victor could see her trying to hide her weariness in every movement, a young waitress came to take his order, and Victor asked for a black espresso, then continued watching Amelia work, noticing she looked thinner than she had 3 days earlier, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cups, and from time to time she had to lean against the counter to steady herself. Around 9 in the morning, when the cafe had thinned out, a middle-aged man walked in, clearly drunk despite the early hour. He sat at the counter directly in front of Amelia and began ordering in a slurred, unpleasant voice. Victor watched from his corner as the drunk man started making crude remarks about Amelia's appearance, then reached across the counter trying to grab her wrist while spewing obscene words. Amelia tried to pull away, fear written across her face. But she did not dare fight back because she needed this job. Victor stood up and walked to the counter. He did not say a single word. He simply stood behind the drunk man and looked at him with icy gray eyes, the kind of look anyone in the underworld knew well, the look of death itself. The drunk man turned around, ready to curse, but when he saw Victor's face, when he looked into those eyes, he froze as if doused with cold water, his survival instincts screaming that this man could kill him right there and no one would dare stop it. The drunk man stammered an apology and hurried out, nearly tripping over a chair as he tried to escape the cafe as fast as possible. Victor turned to Amelia, who stood there wide-eyed, lips parted as if she wanted to say something but could not find the words. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice hoarse with emotion. "But you did not need to do that." Victor did not answer that. He only asked if she was all right, and Amelia nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. "Please do not come here anymore, Victor," Amelia said softly. "I do not want to cause trouble for you, and I do not want people here to know who I am connected to." Victor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. He returned to his table, finished his espresso, and left a bill 10 times the price of the coffee before walking out without another word. But the next morning he came again, sat in the same spot, ordered the same espresso, and watched Amelia work from a distance. Amelia saw him and deliberately sent another employee to serve his table, but Victor did not mind. He only needed to know she was safe, and that no one would dare bother her while he was there. On the 3rd day he came again, then the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. Every morning, Victor Castellano appeared at that small cafe, sitting in his familiar corner, ordering his familiar espresso, silently watching over the woman he had never stopped loving. The cafe staff began whispering about the mysterious man in the expensive suit, who always left generous tips, but never spoke to anyone beyond ordering his drink. And Amelia knew she could not keep avoiding him forever. Yet she had no idea how to face Victor, when her heart still ached every time she saw him. 1 week had passed since Victor began appearing at the cafe every morning, and Amelia still did not know how to handle the situation. But life gave her no time to dwell on it because a far greater storm was approaching. That afternoon, after finishing her shift at the insurance company, Amelia stopped by the daycare to pick up Emma and Mia, then returned to her rundown apartment, where she saw a white envelope slipped beneath the door. She picked it up with a sinking feeling, and when she saw the logo of a law firm printed in the upper left corner, her heart seemed to drop into her stomach. Amelia placed the girls into the crib, then sat on the bed with trembling hands and opened the envelope, and what she read felt like a fist slamming straight into her chest. It was a letter from attorney Jennifer Hayes, representing Derek Morrison, stating that her client had filed for custody of the children on the grounds that Amelia Ward lacked the financial means to properly care for Emma and Mia Morrison, that the hearing would take place within 30 days at the county family court, and that Amelia was required to prepare legal counsel and evidence proving her capability. Amelia read the letter again and again, 3 times in total, as if hoping she had misunderstood, but the words remained there, cold and merciless, just like the man who had sent them. Derek wanted to take her children, the man who had beaten her for 4 years, the man who had broken her ribs 3 times, the man who had kept her locked inside the house like a prisoner, now wanted custody of the children he had never cared about. Amelia knew this was Derek's revenge for daring to divorce him, for daring to escape, for daring to say no, and she knew he would never leave her in peace. She checked her bank balance on her phone, $23.70, then searched online for the cost of hiring a custody lawyer, and the number that appeared made her want to cry. At least $5,000 for a mid-level attorney, and up to $20,000 if the case dragged on. Amelia did not have $5,000. She did not even have $500. She was 3 months behind on rent and had only enough money left to buy formula for a few more days. She considered representing herself, but she knew that would be suicide when facing a professional like Jennifer Hayes, a lawyer known in legal circles as ruthless and undefeated. Amelia pulled her knees to her chest and began to cry, muffled sobs filling the small dark room, while Emma and Mia looked at their mother with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. She could not lose her children. She would rather die than let Derek touch Emma and Mia. She would rather die than let them live with that violent man. But she did not know what to do. She was completely alone and had no one to turn to. Or maybe she did. A small voice whispered in her mind. There was one person, one man, who had appeared every morning simply to make sure she was safe. But Amelia quickly pushed the thought away because she had left Victor 19 years ago, and she had no right to ask for his help now. She could not owe him anything more. 3 days after receiving the letter from Derek's lawyer, Amelia returned to her apartment after a night shift at the restaurant, and she knew immediately that something was wrong when she saw her belongings scattered across the hallway. Clothes, blankets, her children's toys, the old crib, everything she owned in this world lay strewn across the cold concrete floor, and the lock on her apartment door had been replaced. Amelia stood there frozen for a long moment before the reality sank in. The landlord had evicted her without warning, without giving her a chance to explain or ask for more time. He had thrown her and her 2 small children out like garbage. She rushed down to the ground floor where the private daycare that watched her children at night was located. And when she carried Emma and Mia outside, the daycare owner looked at her with pity and said Amelia was 2 months behind on payment, and without it she could no longer keep the girls. Amelia thanked her and promised to pay as soon as possible, even though she had no idea where the money would come from. Then she carried her children back up to the 5th floor, stuffed their belongings into a few plastic bags, and dragged the old stroller down the stairs with shaking legs. When she stepped outside the building, rain began to pour as if the sky itself wanted to push her into the abyss. Amelia pulled up the stroller cover to shield her children from the rain, then stood beneath the awning of a closed shop, wrapping her thin coat around herself and staring at the white curtain of rain before her. She took out her phone and called everyone she knew, co-workers from the cafe, people from the insurance company, even those she had only met a few times. But no one answered. No one returned her messages, and Amelia realized a bitter truth that she was completely alone in this world, without family, without friends, without anyone who cared. The rain grew heavier, and the cold wind cut through her, making her shiver violently. Emma began to cry from the cold and hunger. Mia followed, and the sound of her daughter's cries tore at Amelia's heart. She held both girls close, trying to warm them with her own body heat as tears mixed with rain streamed down her face. The clock read 11 o'clock at night, and Amelia had nowhere to go. The homeless shelters had stopped accepting new arrivals at 9 in the evening. She had no money for a hotel room, and she could not let her children sleep on the street on a cold, rainy night like this. She looked at her phone screen, slick with rain, and saw a number in her contacts that she had never called. Victor's number, which Marco had quietly saved in her phone one day at the cafe when she was not paying attention. Amelia stared at that number for a long time. She thought about her pride, about how she had left 19 years ago without a single explanation, about how she had no right to ask for his help. But then Emma cried sharply from the cold, and Mia began coughing, and Amelia knew she had no other choice. She pressed call with trembling hands, her heart pounding as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked, and the familiar low voice answered. Amelia. Victor said her name, and that single word was enough to make her break down. Victor, she said through sobs. I am sorry to call you at this hour, but I do not know who else to call. That offer you made to help me that day, does it still stand? Victor was silent for a second, then asked where she was, his voice no longer cold but filled with concern. Amelia gave him the street corner where she was standing, and Victor said only one thing. Stay there, I am coming now, and then the line went dead. 15 minutes after the call, Amelia saw the headlights of a 3-car motorcade turn into the narrow dark street where she was standing, and she did not know whether she felt relief or shame when the sleek black Maybach stopped right in front of her. Victor stepped out of the car before the driver could open the door for him, wearing a white dress shirt and slacks as if he had not had time to change out of his sleep clothes when he received the call. And when he saw Amelia standing beneath the awning with her 2 children in her arms, soaked and shivering in the cold rain, his gray eyes darkened with an emotion Amelia could not name. Victor did not say a word. He took the long black wool coat Marco had just handed him from inside the car, stepped toward Amelia, and draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering there for a brief second, as if wanting to say something. Then he turned to look at the two crying girls in the stroller. Emma and Mia were trembling from the cold, their lips tinged blue, and Mia's coughing made Victor frown with worry. He bent down and carefully lifted Emma into his arms, as if afraid of hurting the fragile child, then gestured for Marco to take Mia. Amelia tried to speak, to explain, to apologize for bothering him, but Victor only shook his head and said in a low, gentle voice, "Don't say anything. Get in the car. We'll talk later." Marco had already gathered Amelia's few belongings into the trunk, while another bodyguard folded up the old stroller, and Amelia climbed into the Maybach on trembling legs. She sank into the soft, warm leather seat, and for the first time in hours, she felt her body slowly begin to warm. Victor sat beside her with Emma in his arms, the little girl no longer crying and now staring curiously at the unfamiliar man, with wide eyes still wet with tears, while Marco sat in the front seat holding Mia and awkwardly trying to soothe her with a clumsy lullaby that almost made Amelia smile despite everything. The motorcade left the poor neighborhood and headed north, where the roads grew wider, the houses larger, and the streetlights brighter. Amelia looked out the window, silent tears sliding down her cheeks as she realized she was being taken into a world completely different from the one she had lived in for the past 6 months. Victor noticed her tears and said nothing. He simply reached out, took her ice-cold hand in his, and held it firmly, as if telling her without words that everything would be all right. When the motorcade stopped before the massive iron gates of the Castellano estate, Amelia held her breath as the grand mansion came into view. Warm golden light spilling from tall windows like stars in the rainy night, making her feel as though she had stepped into an unreal dream. Victor carried Emma out of the car and waited for Amelia to follow, and when she passed through the enormous oak doors into the mansion, she felt the heat from the central heating wrap around her and the soft scent of polished wood in the air. A middle-aged housekeeper in uniform was waiting in the foyer with warm towels and dry clothes, and Victor instructed her to prepare rooms for Amelia and the children, then ordered his private doctor to come immediately to check on the girls because he was worried Mia might develop pneumonia after being soaked in the rain for so many hours. Amelia stood in the opulent hall, her bare, wet feet on the gleaming marble floor, feeling like a stain in a perfect painting. But before she could say anything, Victor turned to her and said, "You won't be alone anymore, Amelia, whether you want it or not." The next morning, Amelia woke up in a luxurious guest room and needed a few seconds to remember where she was. Early sunlight filtered through cream-colored silk curtains and birdsong rose from the garden outside like a gentle melody, utterly different from the car horns and shouting she was used to hearing every morning in her old neighborhood. She sat up and saw Emma and Mia playing on a soft fur rug on the floor, while an older woman dressed in an elegant black dress sat on the sofa, watching the girls with an expression Amelia couldn't read. The woman's silver hair was neatly swept into a high bun, her sharp gray eyes identical to Victor's, and the authority radiating from her smallest movements told Amelia exactly who she was, even though they had never met. "You're awake," Rosa Castellano said in a low voice without emotion. "I'm Rosa, Victor's mother, and I want to know who you are and what you want from my son." Amelia swallowed and forced herself to sit a little straighter, even though she was still wearing the sleepwear the house staff had given her the night before. "My name is Amelia Ward, and I don't want anything from Victor. I only need a temporary place to stay, and I'll leave as soon as I find somewhere else." Rosa looked her up and down with the cold, assessing gaze of someone accustomed to judging people in seconds, and said, "Do you think I don't know who you are? You're the orphan girl from years ago who seduced my son and disappeared without a word. And now, 19 years later, you return with 2 small children looking like a beggar. Do you think I don't see this as a trap?" Amelia felt as if she had been slapped, but she didn't lower her head. She met Rosa's eyes and said, "I never intended to seduce anyone, Mrs. Castellano. I don't want anything from Victor, and I certainly don't want the money or status of this family. I only need a temporary roof over my children's heads, and I'll take care of my life myself." Rosa was about to say more when Victor walked into the living room. He looked at his mother, then at Amelia, and his eyes darkened as he sensed the tension in the room. "What are you doing, Mother?" Victor asked in a low voice that Amelia knew meant he was trying to contain his anger. Rosa stood up and faced her son. "I'm only asking about your guest, Victor. I have the right to know whom you bring into this house." Victor stepped forward and placed himself between Rosa and Amelia like a protective wall and said, "Amelia is my guest, and I won't allow anyone in this house to make her uncomfortable, including you." Rosa stared at her son in disbelief. "You're speaking to your mother like this because of a stranger, Victor. she asked with a wounded edge in her voice. She's not a stranger to me, Mother, Victor replied, his tone softening slightly. She's the woman I've loved since I was a teenager, and I don't need your permission or anyone else's to help her. Rosa fell silent for a long moment, then turned to look at Amelia, her gaze still suspicious but less cold than before. You say you don't want anything from this family. Then prove it, she said before leaving the room and the heavy silence behind her. Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and looked at Victor. I'm sorry for causing trouble between you and your mother. Maybe I should leave. Victor turned to her and shook his head. You're not going anywhere, Amelia. My mother will understand. She just needs time. And Amelia didn't know whether she should believe that, especially with Rosa's gaze still lingering in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. That afternoon, after Rosa left the estate to visit an old friend as she claimed, though everyone knew she simply wanted to avoid Amelia, the atmosphere in the house grew lighter, and Amelia finally felt able to breathe again. She was sitting on the rug playing with Emma and Mia in the large living room when soft footsteps sounded from the staircase, and she looked up to see Ethan standing on the last step, an 8-year-old boy with black hair and gray eyes identical to his father's, staring at her and the girls with undisguised curiosity. Hello there, Amelia said gently, forcing a friendly smile. You're Ethan, right? Your father's told me about you. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stood there watching for a moment as if deciding whether she was a threat, then slowly walked down toward them, his gaze fixed on the 2 little girls sitting on the rug with colorful wooden blocks. These are Emma and Mia, Amelia said. They're 14 months old, and they're my daughters. Ethan sat down beside the rug and studied the twins with the seriousness of a scientist examining a new species, saying nothing, until Mia crawled closer and wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, and in that instant, something quietly miraculous happened. Ethan smiled. Not the polite smile he used with adults, or the stiff one he wore when forced to pose for photos, but a real smile from deep within, the kind that lit up his gray eyes as if sunlight had reached them, turning his whole face into that of a normal 8-year-old boy, instead of the prematurely solemn child Amelia had noticed before. She likes me, Ethan said in surprise, letting Mia keep hold of his finger, while Emma crawled to his other side and tugged at his pant leg, demanding attention. Amelia laughed softly and said, It looks like they both like you. Ethan, do you want to play with them? And he nodded without hesitation, catching her off guard because she'd prepared herself for Victor's son to resent their presence in the house. From the doorway of his study, Victor leaned against the frame and watched the scene unfold, his heart tightening in the sweetest way. He watched his son smile at the twins, watched Ethan carefully help Emma sit up when she toppled over, watched him make silly faces until Mia laughed out loud, and he realized this was the first time he'd seen Ethan smile like that since Maria died 5 years earlier. His son had closed his heart for 5 long years, grown quiet and distant, refused to connect with anyone, even him. Yet those 2 tiny girls had done what Victor couldn't manage in all that time. Ethan was now reading a picture book to Emma and Mia in a solemn voice like a university lecturer. This is a cat, and the cat says meow. Do you understand? And the girls stared at him wide-eyed, understanding nothing at all, yet clapping their hands as if it were the greatest lesson in the world. Amelia looked up and met Victor's gaze from the doorway, and she saw that the gray eyes, usually cold as steel, now held something softer, warmer, something she remembered from 19 years ago, when they were just 2 kids in love beneath an oak tree. Victor said nothing. He only gave her a slight nod of thanks before turning away, but Amelia caught the faint curve of his mouth and knew that no matter how much Rosa disliked her, she'd done at least one thing right by coming here, because Victor's son was laughing, and that laughter was the most beautiful sound this house had heard after so many years of silence. That evening, after Emma and Mia were fast asleep in the new crib Victor had ordered for them, he knocked on the guest room door where Amelia was staying and stepped inside with a serious expression, as if preparing to say something important. I have a proposal, Victor said as he sat down in the chair across from her. There is a separate guest house on the estate grounds, fully furnished and spacious enough for you and the girls. You could move there and stay long-term instead of living in the main house like this. Amelia shook her head immediately, without a second thought. Thank you, Victor, but I can't accept that. I've already told you I only need a temporary place, and I'll find a way to manage my life on my own. I don't want to depend on anyone. Victor sighed and leaned forward, his gray eyes locking onto hers. This isn't charity, Amelia. This is me, wanting to help someone I once cared about, and you shouldn't let pride stop you from accepting help when you truly need it. I don't need your help, Amelia replied more firmly, even though she knew it wasn't true. I've taken care of myself for 19 years, and I can keep doing that. I don't want to owe you anything, Victor. Victor stood and stepped closer, his voice sharpening as his patience thinned. 19 years ago, you left without a single explanation, and I spent years wondering what I did wrong. You owe me at least an explanation, Amelia. But I'm not asking for it. I only want to help you, and you keep pushing me away. Amelia stood to face him. Her green eyes shimmering with tears she struggled to hold back. You don't understand, Victor. I can't owe you because I know I'd never be able to repay it. I've owed too many people in my life already, and I don't want another debt. Then think of it as a gift, Victor said more gently. Think of it as my way of making up for the years I couldn't be there for you. Call it whatever you want, but don't refuse help when you need it this badly. Amelia was silent for a long time before finally letting out a shaky breath and sitting back down, her shoulders sagging as if she was too exhausted to keep fighting, and she said in a trembling voice, Do you know why I don't want help from anyone? Because the last time I trusted a man, he turned my life into hell. Victor sat beside her and listened in silence as Amelia began to tell her story. She told him about Derek, about a marriage she thought would save her from loneliness but turned out to be a trap, about the first blows he blamed on alcohol, about lying to doctors and saying she'd fallen down the stairs, about nights spent crying in the bathroom with her hands on her pregnant belly, terrified he would kill her and the unborn children. She told him how she tried to escape 3 times, how Derek always found her and dragged her back, how he threatened to kill her if she ever filed for divorce, and how she finally got away when he left on a business trip, hiding for 6 months so he couldn't find her. And now, Amelia said through choking tears, now he's suing for custody. He says I don't have the financial means to care for Emma and Mia, and the hearing is in less than a month. I don't have money for a lawyer, Victor. I don't have anything, and I'm about to lose my children. Victor took her hand, and she felt the strength in his grip, the warmth and certainty she hadn't felt from anyone in years. And he said in a low, powerful voice like a vow, Derek Morrison will never touch you or your children again, Amelia. I promise you. And when Victor Castellano makes a promise, it will be kept, no matter the cost. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep, even though her body was exhausted after so many days of strain. So she decided to go down to the garden behind the estate to breathe in some fresh air. The vast garden was filled with neatly trimmed rose bushes and a small fountain at its center, moonlight spilling down to cast shimmering shadows across the grass, and Amelia felt as if she had wandered into another world, one that was peaceful and far removed from all the suffering she had endured. She wasn't surprised to see Victor sitting on the stone bench near the fountain, a half-burned cigar in his hand, gazing up at the night sky with a distant, thoughtful expression. Can't sleep either, Victor asked without turning around, as if he already knew she was there, and Amelia sat down on the bench beside him, keeping a careful distance that was neither too close nor too far. I come out here on nights when sleep won't come, Victor said, drawing on his cigar. Since Maria died, there have been more and more nights like that. Amelia listened in silence, because she knew Victor needed someone to unburden himself to, and she wanted to be that person for him, even if only for this moment. Maria was a good woman, Victor continued, his voice lowering. She didn't deserve to die like that. She was shot while picking Ethan up from school, and my son saw his mother die right in front of him. He was only 3 years old, Amelia. 3 years old, and he had to witness that. Amelia raised a hand to cover her mouth, to stifle a sob as she imagined the horror of that moment. Thinking of Ethan, the quiet boy who seemed far older than his years, and now she understood why sadness lived so deeply in his eyes. The Rivera gang did it, Victor said, his gray eyes flashing with hatred. They wanted to send me a message, and they used my wife and child to do it. I took revenge. I destroyed everyone involved, but Maria never came back, and Ethan's closed his heart for 5 years now. Amelia didn't know what to say, so she simply placed her hand over Victor's and gave it a gentle squeeze, a small gesture, but enough to let him know she was there and that she understood. They sat in silence for a long time, with only the soft sound of water flowing from the fountain and the chirping of crickets in the night. Then Victor turned to her and asked in a roughened voice, "Why did you leave, Amelia? Why did you walk away from me 19 years ago without saying a word?" Amelia felt her heart tighten, knowing this was the moment she should tell the truth, should tell Victor about the terrifying night when his father appeared in her small apartment with 2 armed men and threatened to kill her and her aunt if she didn't disappear from Victor's life. She opened her mouth to speak, then thought of Tony Castellano lying ill in his bed, thought of how Victor would feel knowing his father had destroyed his happiness, thought of the fragile bond between father and son that she didn't want to shatter any further, and she swallowed the truth back down. "There are things I can't tell you, Victor," Amelia said instead, her voice trembling. "But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I hurt you. And if I could turn back time, I wish everything had been different." Victor studied her for a long moment as if trying to read what she was hiding. Then he nodded and accepted her answer, even though they both knew it wasn't enough. He didn't press her, and Amelia felt grateful for that mercy. After the night they talked in the garden, Amelia finally accepted Victor's offer and moved into the guest house on the estate grounds with Emma and Mia. The small, beautiful house had 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and every modern comfort Amelia had never dared to dream of. She tried to refuse when she saw the brand new furniture and the refrigerator stocked with food, but Victor only said this was basic living standard and she shouldn't overthink it. One peaceful week passed and Amelia slowly adjusted to her new life. She still insisted on returning to work despite Victor's objections, and in the end, they compromised that she would keep only 1 daytime job at the cafe instead of 3 like before. Every day, Amelia brought Emma and Mia to the daycare connected to Westbrook Academy where Ethan studied. She was surprised when Victor suggested this, but he explained it would make security easier, and Ethan could visit the girls during lunch break. That afternoon, when Amelia went to pick up her daughters from daycare and was pushing the stroller out through the school gate, a familiar figure suddenly stepped directly in front of her, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw Derek Morrison standing there with a cruel smile on his lips. "Hello, my ex-wife," Derek said in a falsely sweet voice. Amelia knew too well as the warning sign of a coming storm. "I hear you're living at Victor Castellano's estate now. You move fast, from a real estate boss to a mafia boss. You really know how to choose men." Amelia stepped back instinctively and pulled the stroller behind her to shield her children. "What do you want, Derek?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay calm, while fear made her tremble inside. Derek moved closer and lowered his voice into a threatening whisper. "Do you think you can run by crawling under that mafia bastard, Amelia? Do you think he can protect you from me? I'll take my children back and I'll destroy you. You won't have anything left when I'm done." Amelia wanted to scream, but her throat locked tight and she could only stand there shaking as Derek let out a mocking laugh and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if he'd never been there. She didn't know that the entire encounter had been recorded by the bodyguard Victor had assigned to follow her and reported to him immediately. That evening, Victor summoned Amelia to his office in the main house, his face cold as ice and his gray eyes burning as he placed his phone with the video clip on the desk in front of her. "I need you to tell me the truth about your marriage to Derek Morrison," Victor said in a low, authoritative voice. "Not the shortened version you gave me before, but everything, every detail, every bruise, every time he touched you." Amelia met Victor's eyes and knew there was no way left to hide, so she sat down and began to speak. She told him about the first time Derek hit her just because she came home 5 minutes late, about how he controlled everything from the clothes she wore to the people she spoke to, about the nights he came home drunk and used her like a punching bag, about the time he kicked her stomach when she was 4 months pregnant and she spent an entire week in the hospital fighting to keep the babies, about the long scar across her back where he lashed her with a belt when she dared to talk back. Victor listened in silence, and Amelia could see his jaw clenched so hard the tendons stood out along his neck. His hands curled into fists on the desk, knuckles white with pressure. When she finished, the room sank into a heavy silence, and Victor stood and turned his back to her, staring out the large window toward the city lights before speaking in a voice cold as steel and filled with lethal intent. "Derek Morrison will pay for every wound he's ever inflicted on you, Amelia. I swear it on my life." 2 days after the conversation with Amelia, Victor instructed Marco to deliver a special invitation to Derek Morrison, and the so-called businessman had no choice but to appear at the designated location at 10 o'clock at night. The abandoned warehouse lay on the eastern outskirts of the city, an old structure with stained concrete walls and the heavy stench of dampness hanging in the air, a place the Castellano family often used to resolve matters that required discretion. Derek walked into the warehouse wearing a mask of confidence, though Amelia would have recognized immediately that it was the face he wore when he was afraid, and he glanced around to see at least 10 men dressed in black lining the walls, each with a weapon clearly visible at their side. Victor sat on the only wooden chair in the center of the warehouse, legs crossed, his icy gray eyes watching Derek approach with the calm amusement of a cat playing with a mouse. "Mr. Castellano," Derek began, forcing his voice to steady, "I don't understand why you wanted to meet me in a place like this. If there's something to discuss, we could have met at a luxury restaurant." Victor didn't respond right away. He looked Derek up and down with open contempt, as if examining an insect, then stood and walked toward him, each step echoing through the empty space like a countdown to a sentence. "I hear you ran into Amelia at Westbrook 2 days ago," Victor said slowly in a low voice. "You threatened her and her children in front of dozens of witnesses. Do you think that was wise, Morrison?" Derek swallowed and took a step back, but 2 guards moved in behind him, blocking his retreat. "Amelia is my ex-wife, and Emma and Mia are my children. I have a right to see them," he said, trying to sound firm. Victor let out a short laugh, cold and humorless. "Rights," he said. "You want to talk to me about rights, Morrison? What rights do you have after beating your wife for 4 years? What rights do you have after breaking her ribs 3 times? What rights do you have after kicking a pregnant woman in the stomach?" Derek's face drained of color at those words, and he knew Victor had done his homework. "That was between me and Amelia," he stammered. "She exaggerated. She always exaggerated everything." Victor held out his hand, and Marco immediately placed a black leather briefcase into it. Victor opened the case, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and tossed them at Derek's feet. "Do you think all I know is that you beat your wife, Morrison?" Victor said, his voice laced with threat. "I know everything about your money laundering for the Rivera gang. I know about the 23 offshore bank accounts you used to move dirty money. I know about the phantom properties you created to legitimize illegal funds. I have enough evidence to put you in prison for at least 30 years, or to hand you over to the FBI and let them deal with you." Derek stared down at the documents, his face shifting from pale to ashen as the truth sank in that Victor wasn't bluffing. He began to shake, and for the first time since entering the warehouse, real fear settled deep into his bones. "What do you want?" Derek asked hoarsely, every trace of his earlier confidence gone. Victor stepped closer until his face was only inches from Derek's, his gray eyes like bottomless pits of ice. "I want you to withdraw your custody lawsuit. I want you to disappear from Amelia's life and from her children's lives. I want you to stay at least 100 meters away from them forever. And if you don't do exactly as I say..." Victor paused and smiled, a smile as cold as winter. "Then these documents will be on the FBI's desk tomorrow morning, and you'll have plenty of time to reflect on your choices inside a federal cell." Derek nodded rapidly like a puppet on strings. "I understand. I'll withdraw the case. I won't go near them again," he said in a trembling voice. But as he turned to leave, Victor caught the simmering hatred still burning in Derek's eyes, and he knew a man like Derek Morrison wouldn't let go so easily. He would look for revenge, and Victor would need to be ready for it. The evening after the meeting with Derek, life inside the Castellano estate became strangely peaceful, as if the storm had finally passed and left behind a clear sky. Victor began coming home earlier. No more meetings that dragged past midnight and no more sudden business trips, and he spent more time with Ethan. And without quite realizing when it happened, the presence of Amelia and the twins became an essential part of his daily life. Every evening they ate dinner together in the grand dining room. Ethan talked about what he had learned at school while Emma and Mia sat in their high chairs and made a mess with their food, and although Rosa still kept her distance, she no longer looked at Amelia with hostility and occasionally even asked about the health of the 2 little girls. Victor liked watching Amelia smile, and he realized he had missed that smile for 19 years, and now every time she smiled his heart beat faster, as if he were still the 17-year-old boy he once was. One night after Ethan had gone to bed, and the twins had been settled into their cribs, Amelia decided to make a late-night meal to thank Victor for everything he had done, and she didn't expect him to appear in the kitchen while she was struggling with a pot of noodles. "What are you doing?" Victor asked as he walked in, and Amelia startled and nearly spilled the boiling water. "I'm making noodles," she replied, trying to steady herself. "I thought you might be hungry since you barely ate at dinner." Victor stepped closer, his presence filling the small kitchen and making the air feel thick with a tension Amelia couldn't name. He didn't look at the food, but only at her, his gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound being the soft bubbling of the pot on the stove. Then Victor kissed her, without warning or any sign at all. He simply bent down and pressed his lips to hers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but to Amelia it felt like a lifetime. All the years of separation, all the pain and loneliness dissolving in the moment their lips touched. When Victor pulled back, Amelia stared at him with wide eyes and whispered, "What did you just do?" "You're too beautiful when you argue about mushrooms," Victor replied with a rare, small smile. "I couldn't stop myself." "That doesn't mean anything," Amelia said, though she didn't step away. Most things between us don't make sense, Victor answered, lifting his hand to gently stroke her cheek. But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel anything for you anymore, Amelia. I've loved you since we were children, and 19 years apart didn't change that. Amelia felt tears spill over and didn't bother wiping them away. I'm scared, Victor, she whispered. I'm scared to love you and lose you again. Victor pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. This time I won't let you go anywhere. Amelia, he murmured into her hair. And for the first time in many years, she let herself believe a man. 2 weeks after the kiss in the kitchen, life for Victor and Amelia began to take on a new color, as they slowly learned how to open their hearts to each other after 19 years apart. But just as happiness was beginning to bloom, a call from the hospital shattered everything. Tony Castellano, Victor's father, the man who had once been the most feared boss on the East Coast of the United States, was now lying on his deathbed after his 3rd stroke, and the doctors said he had only a few hours left to live. Victor drove to the hospital with a heavy heart because even though he had disagreed with many of his father's decisions, Tony was still the man who had given him life and raised him into who he was today. When Victor entered the hospital room, he saw Tony lying there with ashen skin and eyes dulled by age, IV lines and heart monitors creating a mournful rhythm in the stark white room. You're here, Tony said weakly, motioning for Victor to sit beside the bed. I have something I need to tell you before I go. Victor took his father's hand and felt how the hand that had once held so much power was now thin and trembling. Go ahead, he said softly. Tony closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength, then opened them and looked straight at his son. I did something terrible to you, Victor. Something I've hidden for 19 years, and I can't die without confessing it. A chill ran down Victor's spine as he heard those words, and his instincts told him that what his father was about to say would change everything. Amelia Ward, Tony whispered, and Victor froze. I forced her to leave you, Tony continued. I went to her apartment the night before she disappeared with 2 armed men. I threatened to kill her and her aunt if she didn't vanish from your life forever. Victor dropped his father's hand, as if shocked by electricity, and stood up, his gray eyes burning with a rage he had never felt before. What did you do? Victor demanded, his voice shaking as he struggled to contain his fury. Tony coughed weakly, tears slipping from the corners of his eyes. I thought I was protecting you, Victor, he said. She was just an orphan girl with no family, no status. I thought she wasn't worthy of Tony Castellano's son. But I was wrong. I saw how you suffered for so many years, and I know now that I made the greatest mistake of my life. Victor said nothing more. He turned his back and walked out of the room, ignoring his father's weak calls behind him because he couldn't stay another second without losing control. He drove back to the estate with his mind in chaos, and when he saw Amelia playing with Emma and Mia in the garden, his heart shattered at the thought of everything she had endured because of his father. Victor walked toward her, and Amelia looked up, the smile on her lips fading when she saw his expression. Victor, what's wrong? She asked anxiously as she stood up. Victor looked straight into her eyes and asked in a choked voice, My father. He threatened you 19 years ago, didn't he? That's why you left. Amelia stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized Victor knew the truth. She nodded slowly and began to tell him everything. About the horrific night when Tony Castellano appeared in her tiny apartment like a demon from hell. About the 2 guns pointed at her and her aunt. About his voice cold as ice, when he said that if she didn't disappear within 24 hours, both she and her aunt would die, and Victor would have to watch it happen. I was only 15, Victor, Amelia said through her sobs. I was so scared I couldn't sleep for months afterward. I had no one to protect me, and I had no choice but to leave. Victor pulled her into his arms and held her tightly as if afraid she might disappear again. I'm sorry, Amelia, he whispered into her hair. I'm sorry for what my father did. He stole 19 years from us, and I'll never forgive that. Amelia looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. He thought he was protecting you, Victor, she said gently. He was wrong, but he loved you in his own way. Don't let hatred consume you. Victor looked at the woman in his arms, the woman his father had threatened and driven away, who could still speak with such compassion. And he understood why he had loved her for so many years, because her heart was too beautiful and too kind, more beautiful than anything he had ever known. Tony Castellano died later that night, and Victor didn't get the chance to say goodbye, but he didn't regret it, because what his father had done had taken too much from him and from Amelia. The funeral lasted 3 days and drew hundreds of figures from every corner of the underworld And during that time, Victor's attention was scattered just long enough for Derek Morrison to carry out the mad plan he had been nursing ever since the night he was threatened in the warehouse. It was a peaceful afternoon when Amelia took Emma and Mia to a small park near the estate, so they could breathe some fresh air, with 2 bodyguards following as usual. And Amelia felt safe like she did every other day. Everything happened too fast. A black van roared in, gunshots exploded through the air, and the 2 guards went down before they could even draw their weapons. Amelia screamed and tried to reach her children, but someone struck the back of her head and she staggered and fell to the ground. She lay there helpless as Derek stepped out of the van with a deranged smile on his face, lifting Emma and Mia into his arms while his men held Amelia down so she couldn't get up. "I told you, Amelia." Derek leaned down and whispered in her ear. "No one can protect you from me, and now I'm taking back what's mine." She screamed and struggled, but they kicked her in the stomach, doubling her over in agony, and all she could do was watch the van carrying her children speed away and vanish at the end of the road, while Emma and Mia's cries echoed in her ears like knives stabbing her heart. When Victor got the call from Amelia, he was in the middle of a meeting with his allies, and he would never forget the broken sound of her voice when she said Derek took the children. They took Emma and Mia. Victor slammed the phone down on the table, and for the first time in his life, the people around him saw the coldest Mafia boss on the East Coast completely lose control. He shouted and swept everything off the table. He punched the wall until blood ran from his knuckles, and he didn't feel a thing. Marco had to grab his shoulders and say calmly, "Mr. Castellano, we need you focused to find them. If you lose control, who's going to save the children?" The words hit Victor like ice water, and he took a deep breath, his gray eyes sharpening like steel as he gave the order. "Find Derek Morrison. Tear this city apart if you have to. I want to know where he is within 24 hours. Call everyone. Activate every connection. I don't care what it costs." For the next 24 hours, the Castellano Empire didn't sleep. Every eye and every ear in the underworld was mobilized, and finally a source pinpointed Derek's location, an abandoned warehouse on the eastern outskirts, once used as a base by the Rivera gang. Victor led a strike team of 20 men, all heavily armed and ready to die on his command. They surrounded the warehouse from every direction, and when the order was given, it hit like a storm. Victor moved through Derek's men like death walking through a field, the gun in his hand never stopping, and he didn't bother counting how many fell, because his mind had only one goal, finding Emma and Mia. He kicked in the final door and saw Derek standing in the center of the room, a gun pressed to the head of a sobbing Emma, while Mia lay on the floor nearby, both children pale with terror. "Don't come any closer," Derek screamed wildly. "I'll shoot this kid if you take one more step. You think you can take everything from me? Castellano, my wife, my children, my honor. Now you'll pay." Victor stopped and looked straight into Derek's eyes, his gray gaze stripped of rage and filled only with lethal calm as he said, "You have one bullet, Morrison. I have a lifetime to make you die slowly in pain. Ask yourself if it's worth it." Derek shook, cold sweat pouring down his face as he realized he was standing before death itself, and in Victor's eyes he saw no mercy, no hesitation, only a promise of suffering beyond anything he could imagine. The gun trembled in Derek's hand, and at last he let it fall as if it had grown too heavy to hold. Victor didn't waste a second. He raised his weapon and shot Derek in the knee, dropping him screaming to the floor. He wanted to kill him on the spot, but he knew a quick death would be a mercy this man didn't deserve. Victor stepped past Derek, writhing on the ground, and lifted Emma into his arms, holding the crying child tight, then bent to pick up Mia with his other hand. Both girls were terrified but alive, and that was all that mattered. "Take him and keep him alive," Victor ordered Marco, as he walked out with the children in his arms. "I'll deal with him after I get these girls back to their mother." When Victor stepped outside the warehouse and saw Amelia running toward him with her face soaked in tears, when he placed Emma and Mia into her arms and watched her cling to them as if afraid they'd disappear again, he knew he had kept his promise. He had protected the people he loved, and he wouldn't ever let anyone hurt them again. Derek Morrison was arrested shortly after the kidnapping, and the evidence of money laundering, along with the charge of child abduction, sent him to federal prison with a 30-year sentence without parole. The custody trial was completely canceled, and Amelia was granted full legal custody of Emma and Mia with no room for dispute, and as she stood outside the courthouse on the day the ruling was delivered with Victor at her side, she felt for the first time in many years that she could finally breathe. 1 year passed from that day, and life took on a completely new color Amelia had never dared to dream of. She secured a stable job at an accounting firm in the city, not because Victor arranged it, but because she passed every interview on her own and proved her abilities. Something that made her prouder than anything else. The guest house on the Castellano estate became a true home for her and the children. A place filled with Emma and Mia's laughter every day, and a place Ethan visited often to play with the girls he loved, like real sisters. Rosa Castellano eventually opened her heart to Amelia, after witnessing how she cared not only for her own children but also for Ethan. She apologized for her initial behavior, and now she was the first to defend Amelia whenever anyone dared to speak badly of her. That morning, 1 year after Victor first saw Amelia crossing the street with an old stroller, traffic in front of Westbrook Academy was crawling along the sun-baked pavement as usual. Victor parked legally this time, and glanced at the back seat where Ethan sat between Emma and Mia's car seats, with the resigned expression of someone who had accepted his fate. "Dad, when will they be big enough to sit without their own seats?" Ethan complained. "A few more years," Victor replied, trying not to smile. "How many years is a few?" Ethan pressed. "A lot," Victor answered. Ethan sighed dramatically, and declared that his life was one long sacrifice. "Drama runs in the family," Amelia commented from the passenger seat, shooting Victor a teasing look. "I am not dramatic," Victor objected. "You cried during a dog food commercial last week," Amelia reminded him. "The dog lost its owner and was very sad." Victor defended himself. "It was a very emotional commercial." "It was 30 seconds long," Amelia said. 30 seconds can be very emotional," Victor replied, and the whole car burst into laughter. They exited the car like a well-coordinated military operation. Victor carried Mia, Amelia carried Emma, and Ethan handled his backpack along with the twins' daycare bag, since the girls now attended the preschool attached to the school. They crossed the street together, the same crosswalk where everything had begun, where a stroller wheel got stuck and one impulsive decision brought two lives crashing back together after 19 years apart. Mrs. Patterson stood by the school gate with a cup of coffee in hand and a smile on her face as she saw them approach. "The Castellano family," she greeted warmly. "Good morning." "We are not officially Castellanos yet," Amelia corrected with a smile. "Paperwork is just administrative," Mrs. Patterson replied. "In practice, you have been a family ever since I saw Mr. Castellano changing diapers in the parking lot a year ago." "That was an emergency," Victor said seriously. "Emergencies reveal true character," Mrs. Patterson replied with a wink before heading inside. Ethan ran off to meet his friends after kissing the twins goodbye. Emma and Mia were handed over to daycare, where Mia immediately stole another child's toy, while Emma watched with quiet approval. "They are terrible," Amelia said proudly as she watched them. "They are your daughters," Victor commented. "What did you expect?" "Is that an insult or a compliment?" Amelia asked. "It is a loving observation," Victor replied, taking her hand as they walked back toward the car. They walked side by side, hand in hand, not because it was a romantic gesture, but because it had become as natural as breathing after a year of weathering so much together. "Victor," Amelia said as they neared the car. "What?" he asked. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Victor asked. "For parking illegally that day," Amelia replied with a smile. Victor laughed and said it was the most worthwhile ticket of his life. They got into the car and merged into the city traffic, still crowded as ever, the past not erased, the scars still there, and fear still visiting on some late nights. But what was perfection worth anyway? What they had was real, built slowly with patience, laughter, and an enormous amount of diapers. And Amelia finally understood one thing. She had not chosen wrong this time. She had chosen to come home. This was the story of Victor and Amelia. A story of difficult choices, unexpected reunions, and second chances life gives to those brave enough to believe in love. This story reminds us that no matter how painful the past may be, no matter how many times life pushes us to the edge, there is always light at the end of the tunnel if we don't give up. True love does not always arrive at the right time, but if it is real, it will find its way back, whether after 19 years or 20. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, like and share the video so we can continue bringing you heartfelt stories every day. How did this story make you feel? And did it remind you of anything in your own life? We would truly love to read your thoughts from the heart in the comments below. Wishing all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.